Okay. Добре дојдовте, значи, на Гол Ручек, подкаст од Dushko Krstevski. Малку несрекно избрано име, ама ќе поработиме на тоа. Како дел од фестивалот Bookstar 2021. Ова е вториот ден од фестивалот. Вчера го имавме подкастот со Катарина Винклер, чијшто книга Модерн Накед предизвика бум. А денеска одиме, значи, уште еден чекор погоре, а тоа е подкаст со познатиот исландски писател, раскажувач, поет, текстописец, различен концептуален уметник Sjón. Hello, Sjón. Your whole name is...
The whole name in Icelandic is Sigurjón Birgir Sigurðsson. So Sjón makes it easier for everyone.
Yeah, as I read, it means sight, vision, right?
Yes. So it means both sight and vision. So it's both the outer sight and the inner sight.
Well, that's great. Žarko Kujundžički, the creator of this festival and the owner of the publishing house Antolog, one of his most famous book, it was called Spectator, you know, the one who is observing anything. So I think that it wasn't it's not so much coincidence that you are here. No. From what I have read, I read all of your books. It seems that you are quite eclectic in what you write. You have your own style. And but still it varies to different type of books. Today, after this podcast, around 8 o'clock, if I'm not mistaken, would be the presentation of the book that is translated as Čenkarno zlatna kosa sivi oči in Macedonian. I think it's red milk in English, if I'm not mistaken, and in Icelandic is kornglut har gra augu. If I'm not
kornglut har gra augu. So the Macedonian title is direct translation. Yeah.
I'm not a fan of big, titles, but I think that when I compare it with a little bit that I know from not the Icelandic, but let's say German languages, I think that it's kind of sticks better. And still, after I read the book, I find out that the title was carefully chosen. First, I want to talk a little bit about Icelandic culture, Icelandic literature, how it is to be an artist in a country that is smaller than the others. The other countries, but so much heritage, like a folklore, a lot of things that are created now in the modern literature, the modern music scene. We mentioned the metal music scene because it takes a lot from it, and when we mention, usually here in the Balkans, when we mention Scandinavia, we think directly just, like Sweden, Denmark, but we kind of tend to forget that if we take Scandinavian countries are also the Faroe Island, is Iceland also, even Finland, even though it's totally different language and totally different culture, but still I think that they have the concept of being rich countries with folklore, with heritage that can be used more and more and created into meta text. So tell me about bring Iceland to Macedonia.
Well, let's just start by saying that the foundation for Icelandic culture as it is today must be traced to the medieval times. Something strange happened in Iceland after 1100, the year 1100, which no one has any real explanation for, and that is that cultured people in Iceland started writing stories in the Icelandic language. This is at the time when Latin is the main language of study and literature in Europe. But in Iceland, they start using their own language to tell stories of the settlement. The settlement started in the 870s, and they start telling these settlement stories, which are grand prose narratives about the families that settled there, and then the disputes and certain individuals from these families that become the heroes or even anti-heroes of these sagas. We call them sagas. Saga means in Icelandic history. So we're telling histories. And the amazing thing is that not only were they telling their own histories, the histories of the settlement of this country and the memorable characters from that settlement period, they were also documenting the whole Germanic heritage. So big Germanic poems about Attila the Hun and the distant past, they were kept alive in Iceland and finally written down. And most of these grand epic poems would have been lost to the world if they had not been documented in Iceland. So you have this tiny, tiny island up in the North Atlantic with a very small population of people who start a flourishing literary culture. So they write their own stories, they document the Germanic heritage, and they write books about the Norwegian kings, the Swedish kings, the Danish kings, and they just kept writing and writing. And this is the foundation for who we are today. Because after the I would say that after the 1500s, when Iceland finally came completely under the Danish king and we became like a Danish colony, the country was extremely poor by any standards. So the only thing we have to build on, the only thing we have to our names is the medieval literature. We have no churches, we have no visual art, we have no music, we have nothing but what was written.
Only the word. Only the word,
and strangely the written word. So they lay the foundation for written culture in the 1200s, which is amazing. So when Icelanders think about themselves, they think about themselves as a literary nation and as cultured people. And this is something that you learn from a very, very young age. So it doesn't matter if you want to become a musician or if you want to start writing poetry or become a visual artist. You always start from the point that you come from a great culture, even though today there is only 360,000 of us. So this is where we get the confidence from, and this is why we have all these artists from Iceland all over the world. We feel that we have the right to produce our own culture, and maybe because in the early period, from 870 till the 1300 or so, one of the main exports of Iceland was poets. Icelandic poets, they traveled to the courts of the Nordic kings and composed poetry, and they were rewarded with gold. So one of the first exports of Iceland was poetry. So that's where we come from.
That's quite interesting. So the language was preserved. Could we say that the language of the Vikings was most preserved in Iceland, or?
Yes. The language that we use in Iceland today is the language that is closest to the original language of the Nordic countries. So the language that would have been spoken in Denmark, Norway, most likely Sweden, and the Faroe Islands in the Viking times. This is the language that is closest to it, and we can still read those texts from the 14th century. We can read them. And the old poetry of the Vikings, the epic poetry, that was also preserved in Iceland. Many of these epic poems are mythological in nature. They are about the Nordic gods, Thor, Loki, Odin, this Freya, this...
very popular today also because of the Marvel comics,
yes.
but also because of the Vikings series. They're kind of showing us that the Vikings were not the warriors who had two thorns on their head, that actually it was more like a mystification, and like Hogar the Brave, all these cartoons, and actually it was kind of like I think not 100% documented, but still it can relate to history than any other series that are doing like epic and epic battles and wars. So
and I can tell you that I have actually worked on a film called The Northman. It's a Viking film. It will be premiered in April next year.
This is a great news.
Yeah. So it's a big story. It's I can say that in part it's based on the original Hamlet story, which later became Hamlet in Shakespeare's hands.
The King of Denmark.
The King of Denmark. So we are working with that, the basics of that story as it was known in the North not long before Shakespeare. And we worked with scholars and anthropologists and archaeologists for creating the world of the Northman. So now we will step forward with the most accurate depiction of the Viking times ever seen in cinema, on the screen. So it's been a great adventure to do it. It's an American film. It's a big American film, but it has its roots in the Nordic countries. And Alexander Skarsgård, the Swedish actor, he is playing the main role, and he's one of the producers and the people who started this project.
Wasn't he also a part of the Vikings, I think?
No, his brother, Gustav.
Gustav.
Gustav Skarsgård was...
Because I remember the surname,
Gustav was Floki, the character Floki in the Vikings. No, so this is where we come from, This is the literary heritage, this is the cultural heritage. And we are always aware of it. But of course in the centuries between the medieval times, the Nordic countries were Catholic, then they became Protestant, and then they were modernized. So we are also aware of the trappings of getting too absorbed in that culture, especially after the National Socialists, after the Nazis of Germany, in a way kidnapped Nordic culture, because they took all the symbology of the Nordic culture. The swastika comes from the Thor's hammer.
The Teutonic stories and everything, and they try to apply it in their everyday propaganda.
They named their battalions, and they named their buildings and their institutions after the Nordic. After elements in the Nordic heritage, they used the runes for decorations and everything. And it took a while for Nordic artists and creators to reclaim that heritage
and to clear the name of
it. But the crazy thing is that, of course, the swastika will never be cleaned or cleared. The swastika will always stay as the symbol of that Third Reich evil empire.
As we say, when you see, we say na prva topka, when you say it on the first, you always connect that, but you have to be at least read a little bit more in order to know those type of swastikas. They're also in one of the towns that is like a center of the medieval Slavic culture in the Balkans, Ohrid.
Yes.
Because it's also connected with Eastern symbol of the sun. The swastika is also connected. So when you see oh my God, so does this mean that here the German army was built? No, it was built like centuries and centuries ago. It's like a symbol, but people tend to always connect that with something else. So you mentioned that topic of the National Socialism, which is a part of the topic of your book, Čenkarno-zlatna kosa sivi oči, Red Milk, if we use the English title. But this is not a book that if somebody expected that this book will write about an angry person who wants to kill everyone, who is growing bitter, or who is becoming the new Antichrist, the new Hitler, it's not like that. It actually reminds me of a little bit, and I know that you want to talk about that. I saw from your previous interviews, I cheated a little bit and do a little, and I did a little bit investigation of your interviews, and I found out you're a very talkative person, so I'm really enjoying this podcast. It kind of reminds me that the person is, I was doing my job, just like Eichmann said in Hannah Arendt's Eichmann in Jerusalem. So this person, Gunnar, is not actually a new leader. He's just is he a person who just has bad company and bad books to it?
What I wanted to explore was how an ordinary person becomes involved in these ideas. And I wanted to destigmatize, in a way, the neo-Nazi image, because after I had thought about this for a long time, I realized that one of the reasons the neo-Nazis are successful in their propaganda is that there is no real way of entering into conversation with them. They very much like the avant-garde in arts. They refuse the conversation. It's built into the system that they refuse the conversation. And
could they create a party or like a
to start
movement?
To start somewhere, I thought, let's look at how someone from an ordinary family becomes involved in these ideas, and how, at least until the very page of this book, it is like almost like an innocent rite, He is taking in these ideas. Of course he knows what has happened in the Second World War. He knows about Eichmann. He knows about the Holocaust. But at the same time, it's almost like an intellectual game for him, to be in this. It becomes a game and comes a way of becoming something, not maybe something absolutely grand, but at least it gives him an idea of himself, and he finds a way of making himself important with people who are also involved in this world of neo-Nazism. So I just wanted to explore this, because there is no neo-Nazi movement without ordinary people supporting it. And one of the studies I read, a study from Sweden, showed that even though you have like the skinheads in boots, with the flags on the city squares shouting and fighting with the police and the anarchists, this is the public image of the angry neo-Nazis. But the people who are paying for all the printing of the leaflets and paying for the rent of the little headquarters and everything, that is the invisible people. That is people who are...
There's some businessmen, they look like interpreters,
Yeah, and they have jobs in banks, and they have jobs in small companies and things like that, well-behaved, well-brought-up people. And Mike Gunnar is one of these people. He is one of these people who are, so important for these ideas to succeed in the end. And you say he's not angry, he's not violent, that's true. But at the very end of the book, we discover that he and his small group of neo-Nazi friends in Iceland they have started making a list of the Jews living in Iceland. And why do you make a list of people? Well,
either to harm them or to, I don't know, work on their moving,
Yes.
removing them from the society, putting them on the next ship.
So they are taking the first steps towards what will become.
But still baby steps, compared.
Absolute baby steps. And it's very important to remember that this all happens in baby steps.
Yeah. It started like that. I mean, the history taught us. I can swear that you knew my questions because I wanted to compare with during the 90s. Me as a rock and metal head going out, we had a group of people that at least I didn't hang out with them. They were a Macedonian version of skinheads, but actually more with the music of the skinheads, and just some of them were more ideologically connected, because there was one movie, Romper Stomper, I think it was called, and it kind of looked great for him to, shave their heads and wear Doc Martens. And even that group kind of divided into two groups here. One of them were they were even like something like communistic skinheads, and some of them were like the Nazi skinheads. I mean, none of them, they just went through those high school years and then they find decent jobs, and they just forgot that it was more like a revolt toward their parents, and maybe like a revolt to their authority at home, which were more anti-fascistic. If you come from Macedonia, who was actually on the side of the anti-fascist movement, the partisans, and with the allies, it's not that you can start up a Nazi movement here. But there were like several, like 50 or maybe 100 who wanted to go look like a tough guys. And actually the only thing that they did, maybe a fights during the football matches, just like the football hooligans, and maybe a clash or two with Albanian youngsters. Obviously they didn't have too much casualty, but in here we didn't have that sort of underground movement that is spreading these new movements. And I can see from some movies and documentaries that some of them are existing in Europe, and
and Sweden is actually the motherland of the Nordic neo-Nazi movement. My Gunnar in the book, he is corresponding with the founder of the Swedish neo-Nazi group, and he wants his little cell to become a part of that, so they can get some power. And I think the reason that I write this book as I do it is simply because this is how it was. I mean, we did not have an angry, aggressive neo-Nazi group in Iceland, but they were finding their way, and if he hadn't died, nobody knows what they would have developed into. But it's very interesting what you're saying about the skinheads here, because there is an incredible power in the skinhead image, the boots, the shaved head, the bomber jackets. This is a very powerful outfit that you can take on.
Yeah, they look scarier.
They look scary. And if you want to say fuck you to the world, this is a great way of doing it. And I think one of the charms of the neo-Nazi movement and National Socialism originally is that it springs up from the same energy as the avant-garde, as the European avant-garde. It is an attack on the situation after the First World War. It is an attack on the culture and the societies that produced the horror of the First World War. So just as the National Socialists used elements from the avant-garde to prop themselves up, to create their image, to attack the dormant society into action, the neo-Nazis today, they are seeking energy also from punk and all of these You know, youth movements, music movements. You
they're
know.
kind of subculture. They're creating a subculture.
They're creating a subculture.
Who is not always just artistic. Sometimes it's even ideologically, and it can start things. Macedonia, as a part of former Yugoslavia, was more with communistic background, and you could not say anything bad about the communists. And I mean, if they found out that you at least read a Nazi literature, I mean, you will end up in prison for life. But after the 90s, after all those republics dissolved, after Yugoslavia dissolved, there were some movements who were trying to bring a little bit art with a little bit politics, and
yes. But I think we should also be aware that after the Second World War, the people who lost, they didn't just vanish. There were incredibly powerful figures who remained active and active in the shadows, supporting all the new groups that were coming forward with money and opportunities.
Yeah, not all of them went through Nuremberg trials, or not all of them died. Yeah.
No. So this has been a project for certain parts of society for a long time, and we should be aware of it. And that's why we need the discussion, and we need to find a way of having that discussion. And I think what I'm trying to do in my book is to say, okay, let's start by admitting that we all come from the same soil. We all start out as innocent, nice kids in families, you know, that believe that we should have a good life, and we believe in that, you know. And then we split up, and some of us become neo-Nazis, and some of us become metal lovers, and some of us become surrealists, you know. But we should look for the time when we had something in common, and let's start the discussion there.
Yeah. So it can be a warning for the new generations, right?
Yes.
The Blue Fox, it's totally different.
Yes.
From the neo-Nazi subject. It's I know that in one of your interviews you said that people usually mix when they say folk tales, fairy tales, fantasy. It's not the same thing. It's totally different things. Me as a literature professor, so I know kind of where is the difference, where is the fantasy, where the fantasy starts, what is a fairy tale, fable. It's a hard book to define and to put it in a category, but because it has everything. It has the folklore, it has the elements of both fable and a fairy tale somehow. How did you get this melange idea of mixing different genres and still putting also another love story inside and sad story, and how did it occur? This is a book that even though it looks like, oh, I will read it in half an hour, nothing more, but it has every line has a subline. So you need to go over this, as we say, to read in between the lines to find out that there is a story behind the story. How did you get the idea for this book?
I think it started when I was thinking about the world that the folk stories come from. As a child, I was obsessed with folk stories. When I was 8, I was living with my grandmother, and she had a great collection of folk stories, an academic edition, 5 big volumes. It's like the
small Edda, the new Edda.
No, this is later. This is the folklore, and the folklore is the stories from the folk. It's the stories from the you know. So the difference between the sagas and the Eddas and the folk stories is that the folk stories, they come from the common people. They come from the ground. They come from the experience of living in.
Were they
This
similar
hostile
like the Brother Grimm stories? Similar like them?
There are similarities. There are, of course, the Brothers Grimm. They knew that there was a difference between folk stories and fairy tales, and they collected both. And there was a man in Iceland called Jón Árnason, who was inspired by the Brothers Grimm, and he started collecting stories in the mid 19th century Iceland. And these are the books that I read, 5 big volumes. And I was completely obsessed with this when I was 8, 9, and 10 years old. And when I became a writer myself, I realized how much of that experience as a young reader had stayed with, how much it had stayed with me, and actually how much it had defined the way I experienced Surrealism, for example. And I was excited by the fact that in the folk story, the strange elements, the strange animals, or the people living in the hills, or the monster living in the lake, or the people rising from their graves, this is all a part of the reality of the people that are telling their stories. Nobody says, excuse me, what, somebody came from his grave? It's just like, and what did he do? That is the question. The question is, what did he do? It's not, was he real or not? What did he do? And what did the young girl do when she met him in the night?
The golden age of innocence.
The golden age of innocence, but also the golden age of admitting that reality is very brutal, because these are stories from a very brutal reality. Stories told by poor people, who have little opportunities to save themselves, both from the hardship and the elements, the natural elements. So it started there. It started like I started searching for a story that had this sensibility, where one of the characters would be an animal that somehow could transcend the borders between the real and the unreal, the habitat of the humans and wild nature. And I just wanted to turn everything upside down as well, because in this book the priest, the man of God, who should be the one who is speaking for charity and taking care of the weak, he is the evil character. And the scientist, who is like a bohemian, smoking opium or whatever, he is on the side of humanity. And in the middle you have this young woman with Down syndrome who becomes sort of a test to these guys, how they react to the weak. And then you have the blue fox who acts as a catalyst, for the bad guy. So I really just decided to believe in the material. And when I started believing in the material, it came absolutely naturally to me to mix everything. That this was a very fluid world, where borders were never sure. And, like you say, where every sentence refers to a much more complex reality behind it.
Yeah, and archaeology, like digging from one book to another, and Christianity and the paganism. Was Iceland fighting? Did it have some sort of it was not accepted. The Christianity was not accepted without any fight. It had.
It's another strange story from that island in the north, because most likely some of the original settlers were Christian.
So they already came there.
They already came there as Christians, and it's most likely Irish Christianity that came early to Iceland. Because Iceland was settled by people who came from Norway, but also came from Ireland and the islands north of Scotland. And it's most likely that the people who came from Ireland brought with them their own Christianity, and it was never questioned. They just practiced their own religion the Norwegian settlers, they practiced the old Nordic pagan religion. So when
it was quite democratic at that time, right?
It was incredibly democratic, and actually the parliament was founded in 910, some sort of a legislative parliament, which was attended by representatives from all parts of the country, but of course they were representing the great chieftains that ruled the country. But they ruled it together, and there was no king. There was no king in Iceland for centuries. That is amazing on its own. But when Christianity came, it was settled at the parliament. So the parliament decided on accepting Christianity in the year 1000. And it accepted Christianity with paganism given space. So for the first decades after Christianity became like the official religion of the country, you were allowed to practice your pagan religion in private, they said. But it means that there was never a crackdown on it, and there was never a fight. There was never like a war, a religious war. And I think it means that many elements of the pagan religion, they survived in the literature, in the spoken literature at the time. So when written literature came into being 200 years later, it was still preserved, so much of the pagan religion, that it was possible to write the Eddas, for example. So it survived into the Catholic times, and then it was written down, and it kept surviving as written down texts. And I actually think it never went away completely. And that's why we have this very strong folkloric tradition and this fluctuation between the heathendom and Christendom. Yeah. But it was the Reformed Church, actually. When Iceland became Protestant in the late 16th century, that's when they started cracking down on the pagan traditions. Only then. And but it survived.
Because we know that the Protestants are according to the just by the book, and
they're the Talibans.
Because the Christianity here in the Balkans, the Orthodox Christianity, we as a Slavic, I like to consider myself as a Slavic, we cannot accept it from the East Roman kingdom, like the Byzantines, popularly said. But there were some sort of rebellions happening in the north, in Russia. Even Tarkovsky shows that in Andrei Rublev, the movie, that there are some folk traditions. So we have the paganism in some of the customs. If you go to an Orthodox burial or baptizing and everything, you will see a little bit hidden things from the, let's say, wedding. If you go to a Macedonian, Balkan wedding, you will see where the folklore and the paganism is still implemented inside. Sometimes hidden, sometimes a little bit more. Do you think that your character from this book, From the Mouth of the Whale, is he a sort of alchemist? Is he a hidden priest? Is he also a pagan believer? Because around him there is so much darkness going on, and this should be your best metal book, according to me, because it has that atmosphere, and I really like this. Just look like those intros from the bands that I like, but also it's connected with the Old Testament. It's a Jonah from the whale. How did you create this character? Is he again a little bit of everything?
Yes.
A little bit of something?
Yes, he is an Icelandic poor man's Renaissance man, And I base the character on a real person that was alive in the 17th century. And that man was a scholar. He was a self-taught scholar. He was a carver of bone. He was a visual artist. He was an exorcist. He was a healer. And what was dangerous in those times is that he was sympathetic to the Catholic religion that had been banished from the island. And in general, he was just a very curious man. So I just loved the idea that someone who was so optimistic because of his love of knowledge and his creative mind was possible in these dark decades. And these are the dark decades after the Reformation. These are the dark decades of the Protestant Church, giving license to all sorts of horrible behavior, actually. Because even though we should be very critical of the Catholic Church at all times in its history and today, at least it had its kind of a welfare system. It had the monasteries where you had hospitals, you had care for orphans, you had care for the old people. The rich farmers, they were ordered by decree to feed the poor on religious holidays. And, you know, it was a kind of a welfare system dictated by the church. When the Catholic Church was demolished in Iceland in a decade, it was a free-for-all for the greedy farmers. Everything was demolished. The monasteries were demolished, the hospitals were demolished. There wasn't a hospital in Iceland for 500 years. After the monasteries were demolished, there wasn't a hospital in Iceland for 500 years. And the first hospital that was built in Iceland after 500 years, who built it? Catholic missionaries. It's a crazy story. So this guy is going through this absolute darkness, this demolishing of a caring society, he feels. At the same time, he is hearing the first sounds of the Enlightenment. Science is changing, science is becoming investigative. So for him, instead of believing in the unicorn, he becomes instrumental in destroying the myth of the unicorn, because he knows where the horns come from. He knows it's a tooth of a whale that lives off the coast of Greenland. And he provides that information to the big scientist in Copenhagen. So for me, he was just like an amazing character, and he was so open-minded. At the same time, he was investigating not only science, but he was reporting on the horrible things going on, like the massacre of the Basque whalers. He also had this true belief in the wonders of the world, in the marvelous possibilities of nature and visions and everything. He's a little bit like me.
Because I had the sense of, at the same time, the whole atmosphere from the documentary that I watched about Michel de Nostradamus. So he is like a Voltaire, Nostradamus, Leonardo da Vinci. He also reminds me of a Margaret Jursener character, Zenon. There was one book called Black Manna, and also there is a fight between the Catholics and the Protestants there, with a lot of massacre happens around the same time. So I kind of find that, I know this character, not that somebody borrowed it, but it's a person that we need in our books. So he is the bringer of the torch to save us, maybe to destroy us, to enlighten us.
Yeah.
So he is a very needed person. Like you said, Renaissance man. Yeah, we need this.
Yeah, and to have someone like this in this very poor society, this desolate nation where people are like helpless against the power of the rich farmers and the sheriffs and everyone. I mean, he puts himself on the line. And when I was investigating this story and doing the research for it, I was also becoming involved in the work of PAN International, and the Icelandic PAN Center. And I realized that the pattern of his life is really the pattern of the dissident, the pattern of the dissident's life. So the way that he suffers and is punished, and how his family suffers and is punished, is the story of so many dissidents. And it really helped me in writing his story and understanding what he was up against, you know. It was almost like the poet in a dictatorship, that is being punished and imprisoned, possibly killed, at least tortured, for doing what? Believing in poetry, believing in how you speak to the world through poetry. So in a sense, that is what my character is doing. And being an old surrealist, I of course believe that poetry is the alchemy of the word, because you mentioned Paracelsus and these people. I think when you reach this level where you see how everything connects, either in your writing or your thinking or studies or whatever, you become an alchemist.
That's the product at the end.
Yeah. We're all trying to create gold from shit.
Yeah, definitely. You mentioned surrealism. You were part of a neo-surrealist group, Medusa, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
Were they kind of connecting with both musical, artistic, painter scene, like all together also, or it was just connected with writing manifestos or create poetry, short stories?
We were just teenagers, so we were 16, 17 maybe when we founded Medusa, maybe 17, 18, and like all young people at that time, this is like 1979, 1980, till 86, that's when we were like operating. We were also occupied with what was going on in music and film, and the visual arts, you know, and a part of the Medusa group also formed a band that was a part of the music scene in Reykjavik in the 80s. So everything came together, and you can say that we were a kind of anarcho-surrealists. Everybody learned about anarchism through that song Anarchy in the UK with Sex Pistols. Up till that point, nobody had been talking about or even interested in anarchism in Iceland. But it became such an important ideology for us because it helped us break out of the left-right politics that had dominated.
Find your own way, middle way.
This is the middle way, and this is not even, of course, the third way of the Social Democrats, which you can say that was popular in Sweden and in the Nordic countries. This was something completely different that just cut through the bullshit. And this helped us break out of that conversation. We are talking about the Cold War in culture still being going on in Iceland. So if you were a young creative person, you were really asked, and not even asked, but forced to take sides. You had to go to the left or you had to go to the right. And most people, of course, went to the left, because the left in Iceland had all the power when it came to culture and literature, really. And the biggest publishing house, the biggest literary magazine, the most noteworthy critics, they were all coming from the left. So if you wanted to have a chance in literature, you leaned to the left.
To be a conformist, to get
Yeah, but we said no to all of that, and we
had some sort of precautions for you. I don't know, like you wanted to play music that was banned. You had banned music.
No, what we did was that we. And this is, you know, what I was talking about, how the avant-garde refuses the conversation. You know, we just said, we don't care what you think. We will just play at other places, you know. We will publish our books ourselves, you know. And so that's what I did.
But the police will not take you to the station and left you for 2 days to sober up and then return you.
No, it was not. It was never like harsh reactions like that.
Because let's say not here, but I don't know. You could not listen to rock music in Bulgaria, let's say, which
we did not
far
have
away
that.
during the 60s and the 70s. It was maybe a little bit.
But we were constantly told that we were idiots and that we were like ignorants and that we were unresponsible towards what the world was really about and everything, because at that time we had, like I said, a very strong left-wing hold on culture and literature, music. Everything had to serve the goals of, the goals of the Socialist Party in a way.
Good citizen.
To be a good citizen on that side. And we just said no to that. We said our culture is radical in a completely different way, in a way that you won't even understand. And one day they of course gave up, and we became the dominant force in Icelandic culture. And now there's young people who think we did everything wrong, and that is how it should be.
Oh yeah. I mean, every generation there is another one who is becoming, I don't know, Beatles of the new generation. They're becoming the new anarchists, the new punks. I mean,
when they create
every day the gap between me and my students is getting larger. Like, oh, teacher, you cannot listen to those things. Listen our generation. And I said, like, okay, if there is a creative anger, I respect that.
Yes.
Not just anger because I'm not a conformist, because I don't like to be like my teacher. I mean, even though the teacher has more sensibility for his students' type of music than for my, let's say, generation. We mentioned the songs, the groups, the collaboration with the Björk. Björk is popular here, but between those circles, between those people who like special type of music. During the 90s, it was a big deal, on MTV. Actually, there is a video called Venus as a Boy, where my brother learned how to make eggs because she's doing some scrambled eggs on the video, and like, okay, I'm gonna just watch it every day, and I can get it. So
it's good to.
Yeah, she's a really nice artist, and I know that you have a great collaboration with her. How did it start? Is that music your cup of tea, or you're just the lyricist?
We started just as friends in the 80s, and she was doing music, and as I said, some of the guys from the Medusa group, they had their own band, and they were playing in the same small places that Björk was playing with her band. And my best friend and one of the poets of the Medusa group, he was a guitarist in this surrealist punk band, and they became a couple. So one day he introduced me to his new girlfriend, and that was Björk, and we became friends, and spent many years just discussing everything, and I was always involved in what they were doing. I was reading at the concerts, and when they went on tour and things like that, I came with them, and sometimes read poetry, sometimes I was just carrying the stuff, sometimes I was doing the visuals, whatever. So when the Sugar Cubes happened, that was like the big moment, because that's when actually the Medusa group merged with elements from the post-punk music scene. And Thor Eldon, who was the guitarist of the Sugar Cubes, he was this Medusa poet. And all of a sudden my friends became world famous musicians. They were on MTV and everywhere. Later, Björk started her own career as a solo artist, and that's when she called me up and said, Sjón, I'm writing some new songs, and would you like to come and work with me? And I went to her place, and it was like we had opened up the old surrealist laboratory. It's like in I think it is The Bride of Frankenstein, when he returns to the laboratory. And it's all dusty and with cobwebs, but everything is there, all the machinery. So when Björk and I started working again together in 95, I guess, on the first song that we did together, which was Isobel.
Isabel, yeah.
It was like we opened the old Surrealist laboratory, and
The video is great, the text is magnificent.
Yeah.
Also Bachelorette is also one of my...
So for me, it
one of
was
my favorites.
just like a wonderful opportunity to keep working with my old friend Björk. So we are almost like brother and sister. We've known each other. Now we've known each other for 40 years. Imagine.
You were supposed to bring her here also.
Yeah. One day she will come to Macedonia too. But it's like siblings, because we were together. She was 16, I was 19 when we met. So I think maybe in November, December this year, it will be 40 years since we met. Yeah.
But because she has a baby face, she never gets old. She is like eternal beauty and lucidness, and she's creative, and
I think she is such a great example, of what can happen if you just follow your instincts, and you follow your heart, and you follow your own artistic course in this life. And there have been times, when I've been struggling a little bit with what I should do, and it's always then good to think about Björk, and and then I think, okay,
still shivered on my spine when I listened to Play Dead. I think it was with David Arnold, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, he wrote that with David Arnold.
And also those things that I mentioned, I had to grow to whole her albums and listen to it, because I kind of left it somewhere during the 90s. I have to say that, I'm a fan, but of some of the songs I cannot relate with like the whole. But it was good to go through that, and this time carefully with reading the lyrics.
Yes, no, I think she's very inspiring, and I think she's a good example of how someone from Iceland is able to use the cultural heritage of that place and completely renew it.
But it's written inside, deeper. It's not.
It's there. Yes, it's there. Yeah.
Did she introduce you to Lars von Trier, or it was?
Yeah, she brought me into that project. Lars asked her to first write the music, then he asked her to be the main lead actress in it.
He is more popular here, after Dogville.
He's fantastic.
But the last movies, I also have friends that we are going to festivals, and they say Nymphomaniac, Never Again. This is crazy. So, until Dogville, it's like it's okay to love Lars von Trier.
Yes.
But after that, you are walking on a thin ice. They say, because he can be a little bit controversial, and then some interviews, maybe he was taken out of the context. Never mind, we are talking about Dancer in the Dark.
Yeah, Dancer in the Dark. Yeah, Björk brought me into that project, and after meeting Lars, he decided that it was a good idea to bring me on as a lyricist, and together we wrote the lyrics together, Lars and I, and Björk wrote the music. And he was very clear about her not being involved in the lyrics, because he said the lyrics are part of the screenplay, and she's coming on as an actress, and she has to work with what is in the screenplay. So everything that the characters are singing comes from inside the story and comes from inside the characters, and that has to be something that is created by someone that is not interpreting a character in the film. So we did that together, and for me,
is he a easy person to work with or not?
For me,
because he wants to be. For me, he wants to show like a image of.
For me, it was
tough guy.
For me, it was very easy. We really found a way of working together, and he was very generous and good in all our relationships, both as just two guys meeting each other, but also on the creative side. He was very for me, he was very easy to work with. But he's a trickster. Mm-hmm. He likes to play games with people and the press and everyone. And I think it was after. I think it was maybe after. I can't remember what was the last film that was shown in Cannes by him. Maybe it was The House That Jack Built.
Oh yeah.
And
Bruno Ganz, I think.
And he said, I saw a small interview with him where he was asked, about half of the audience left the cinema, and he said, only half. Okay, that means 50% of the people liked it. That's not bad, he said.
Yeah.
So I mean, he's also a good inspiration when it comes to just going for it your own way and not worrying too much about the part of the audience that leaves.
He wants to make an unsettling feeling when you're watching him. So.
It's going to be very interesting to see what he does next, But I haven't been in direct contact with him for quite a long time. I mean, I sent him a birthday greeting when he turned 65 earlier this year, because my son has the same birthday, and my son was born on the 30th of April 1999, when we were working on Dancing in the Dark. So there's always this link with Lars because of that birthday, so I sent him a nice birthday greeting, and he replied very nicely. So that's the last direct contact with Lars. But I really think he is one of the absolutely biggest artists to come from the Nordic countries, and I recommend that people watch the last big interview that was done with him, which is on the Louisiana channel on YouTube. Mm-hmm. He talks about films, and you realize how
I like him as
much he knows
as director, but he becomes a little bit too much for me,
I think he must be waiting for the moment when he becomes a little bit too much for Lars von Trier, but it's not there yet. But it's a beautiful interview, because you realize how incredibly deep understanding he has of film as an art form. Definitely. So for me, once again, listening to him talk about films is amazing.
What is your plan for a new thing? Do you work on a new novel? Could you open just a little bit without any spoilers?
I am usually working on 2-3 novels at a time.
Really, at the very same time.
I'm usually exploring 3 novels at the same time, and then something happens that tells me, okay, now you go for this one. There's maybe new information, or I realize how I can structure it, or I realize the tone of the text, and then I know, okay, of these 3, this is the one I'm going to write next.
And all the others will wait for a better time, so they can be just excluded?
No, sometimes they wait, and I write them later. Sometimes I just, realize or lose interest in them.
They were just sketches.
They were sketches anyway. But at the moment I'm working on film scripts. I worked on this film, The Northman, I mentioned, and then I co-wrote a screenplay for a film called Lamb, and it's a film that premiered in Cannes last year, and it was premiered in the United States last Friday, and it became the biggest premiere of an Icelandic film ever. And it became one of the biggest premieres of a Nordic film ever in the United States. And it's a tiny film. It's a tiny film with 3 characters, 3 human characters. And it takes place on a remote farm in the north of Iceland. There's a farming couple that are living there alone, and one day one of the sheep gives birth to a hybrid human lamb child. And it's a very strange story, and they decide to bring it up as their own child. And this is also from the world of
surrealism. This is the folklore and the surrealism.
This is the folkloric surrealism. So, because of these 2 films, Lamb and The Northman, I've been offered opportunities to work on more film scripts, and that's what I'm doing. So, at the moment, I'm working on a new adaptation of Hamlet. and I'm writing it for Noomi Rapace, the Swedish actress who was in The Girl with a Dragon Tattoo. And she's actually also in Lamb.
Yeah.
But the director of Hamlet is going to be Ali Abbasi, who made the film Border, this strange folkloric Swedish Norwegian story about trolls working as custom officials. Again, this is the world I like to be in when I'm creating. So we are doing a new film adaptation of Hamlet, and it will be a Hamlet that you've never seen before. And Noomi Rapace is going to play Hamlet.
Looking forward to watch these movies. Žarko said only 40 minutes,
Yes.
but man, I think that I can talk with you in
Same here.
another hour, another 3 more hours. But really, this has been one of my best podcasts.
Well, thank you.
Because I really like to talk with someone that you don't need to pull his words of the mouth, you know.
Yeah.
Thank you. This was a great conversation. Really, you are the Renaissance man. I think that so many projects that you were included in and still co-producing, co-writing, collaborating and everything, it's great. You definitely changed the music, the movie industry, and of course definitely not just Icelandic literature but also the European literature.
Well,
I'm really
thank
glad
you.
that Žarko brought you here.
I'm so
on
glad
this
to be
festival.
here, and I can say that it's a good example of the power of literature. That a guy who started writing poetry as a 15-year-old in the suburbs of Reykjavik in Iceland in 1978, that today he is the guest of Bookstar in Skopje. So my poetry brought me here, and I'm very glad for it.
Bjorn, we are honored that you are here. Thank you. Sjón. And good luck tonight again on asking the very same questions. Hope not.